everyone to the Expat Women's Global Mobility Panel. I'm really excited to be here today and have these amazing rockstar women who work in global mobility join us. My name is Nyna Caputi. I'm the founder and CEO of the Expat Woman, and I'm also LinkedIn coach and trainer. And today we will have Prerna Choudhury moderate this panel. But before we do that, or as you join in, let us know in the comments where you're calling in from, what you do. So we'd love to feel like even though you're not on stage, you're part of this panel discussion. So while you're introducing yourself in the chat, I'm going to have Prerna introduce herself, and then we'll have each of the panelists join us as well. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Prerna.
Thank you, Nyna. Thank you for that very nice introduction. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's so wonderful to see all of you here. So my name is Prerna Choudhury, and I am based out of Nairobi in Kenya and originally from India. I work at Labor Mobility Partnerships. So we are an international organization dedicated to scaling the global mobility industry responsibly. So we work with companies, organizations, and governments to test and develop new mobility pathways and solutions, connect the ecosystem of innovative organizations working across training, recruitment, finance, and tech, and support the creation of platforms and events such as this one to foster learning across the global mobility space. But enough about me and us. Let's get to why you're all really here. So we're living through a period of fundamental change in global mobility. And I'm sure many of you have felt the impact firsthand. So whether it's through the growing role of AI in the workplace, the rise of hybrid and remote roles, or the evolving landscape of immigration and how it shapes the movement of global talent. So I'm really looking forward to digging into all of this with our panelists today. And so with that, I'd love to invite each panelist to briefly introduce themselves. So who you are, what drew you to global mobility, and what your work looks like right now. And in the spirit of making this an interactive discussion, I invite each panelist to nominate the next panelist to make the introduction. And we can start with Glynis. Glynis Swan, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Glynis Swan. I am, first of all, a proud immigrant from the tiny British island of Bermuda, which is often seen as an expat heaven. I am now based in these United States of Texas, and if you've ever been to Texas, you know why they say that. Um, my path into global mobility was certainly not planned. I was a tax consultant with an HR background. My practice was being sold, and I literally walked across the street to another Big Four firm with no mobility experience, just some curiosity and confidence, and I landed a role in international assignments. I fell in love with the work. It's been 20 years. I love the people, the complexity. I've served in supplier and in-house corporate roles, and now I lead global teams with a focus on workforce transformation at the intersection of culture, compliance, and leadership. And I will
Glynis, do you want to
pass it
nominate
on.
someone? Perfect.
Yes, I will. I have two past colleagues that I work with, so I'm going to pick one of them, and I'm going to pick on Karen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Hale. I have been in the mobility business for more than 20 years now, originally starting on the supplier side. Like many of the other panelists, I started at a Big Four firm, but I was not specifically in tax. I did human capital outsourcing consulting. It really is specifically for international assignments primarily, but also other kinds of international moves. In the intervening years, I had the chance to also work at a couple of relocation management companies on the supplier side and in several corporate roles. Currently, I lead the mobility program at Indeed. I think most of you may know that name, but is a global search platform, is our primary public-facing part, an HR tech company. And my team leads our relocation, global immigration, and flexible work programs for our internal employees. So super excited to be here. Couldn't be more flattered to be on this panel with these great superstars, and looking forward to answering questions that you may have for us. And I'll pass it over to Linda.
I knew you were going to pass it over to me, Karen. Thank you very much. My name is Linda No. I am based out of Houston, Texas. I have spent 20 years in global mobility, with most of that time being on the client service side. I started on the tax, risk, and compliance side with Big Four. And over the years, I've grown into and a bigger appreciation for the broader program strategy. My time in an in-house role at a larger chemicals company the last couple of years has really shaped how I think about mobility, especially as an enabler. Being on the client service side is very different. We come up with strategies and advice, but being on the in-house and corporate role side, there's some challenges there in trying to implement the advice and strategies that are provided to you. But after a couple of years being in-house, I came back to what my friends call the dark side, moving right back into client service. And my role now at Andersen is the Director of Global Mobility. Andersen is a tax and consulting firm with Global Mobility being its latest and greatest addition. And I thoroughly enjoy this industry, and I'm really looking forward to a really dynamic conversation today. And I'm going to give this to Cheryl.
Thanks, Linda. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I came into global mobility, I think, through a general interest in HR, but maybe just to take a step back, similar to you, Glynis, I am an immigrant from the small but mighty island of Jamaica, and we often compete with the other Caribbean countries, and we're much better. It's just a given fact. So we'll just leave that one there. I've been in Canada, physically, Ontario, Canada, for about 30 years now, and in the industry for just about a little over 13 years, if I don't age myself. And I do remember distinctly a conversation with my HR mentor and I at the time, because I was doing something completely different outside of HR, but this one appealed to me. And I think what really was this niche function is that it sat at the crossroads of talent, business strategy, compliance, and even employee experience. And that, for some weird, odd reason for everybody who's been here, appeals to us, and it still appeals to us, right? So today, though, I lead in a strategic global mobility role, which is really focused on workforce risk, compliance, and program design. And I think, like everyone here on this call, we have that really great ecosystem where our work spans immigration, tax, policy, governance, and anything in between with that. But I think a big part of what I do, and one of our superpowers here on the team, is that we're able to translate mobility from a transactional service into an enablement service here at OpenText, and certainly with the complexity that we're dealing with. So super happy to be here and on this panel, and looking forward to a great discussion. I turn it over to Orla, but I think we're one short, so do we want to keep going until she comes on?
That sounds good. We can keep going. Guys, I was trying to count like the number of years of experience collectively, and I got cut at around like 70 or 80, but it's just incredible. Just trying to think about the wealth of experience and the decades all of you have given to the industry, not to age you, in the words of one of our panelists. But what's just like struck me is just the depth of experience, the length of experience, the cross-cutting nature of your roles, and the complexity, as many of you acknowledged. And so with that in mind, with all of these shifts that you have seen over your long time in the industry, what do you think are the biggest changes or the biggest developments happening in global mobility right now? And of course, AI is one, and I'm sure we'll all speak to that. But would love to hear from your experience what else is on the horizon. And feel free to just jump in as you like.
I can start with that one if you're okay.
Of course.
I'd probably say there are a few shifts that are happening at the same time, unfortunately for us, but also great for us, right? And it's certainly what it's doing is expanding how we're thinking about mobility, and equally how I think organizations have to think about mobility. And one of the biggest for me is that mobility is becoming way more connected to that broader workforce experience and planning conversation. And if you kind of look at the global data that exists, I think we see engagement is still low, stress levels are high, So organizations are somehow, under somewhat of a pressure to think about holistically, how do we attract, support, and retain talent, and how can we leverage global mobility to do so? So I think the conversations are certainly starting to play a significant role in that design. And it's no longer just about movement, how we've traditionally thought about mobility, but it's now how are we thinking about the employee experience across the different markets and within the way in which the way of world is the work of changing. So remote work and all those dynamic environments, I think they're shifting how we're coming to the table to have that conversation. And unfortunately, I think in parallel, the environment is becoming way more complex and a lot less predictable. So immigration timelines, regulatory changes, and even just the broader geopolitical factors, I think, are shifting way faster than I think we can keep up with. So it's the conversations are now, can we support this? How do we even make this work when someone has to be on the ground a lot faster than we anticipated? But because of constraints, that is shifting. So I think those conversations are really changing for us. And I'll leave someone else to talk about AI because my journey with mobility in AI is too new, but I'll pause there.
I can jump in and comment. Sorry, I can jump in and comment on the tech and AI. Looking back from my career across mobility over these 20 plus years, it's amazing what tech has allowed us to do, and the things that we can do now that weren't even within the realm of possibility back when I started in this business. If you go back those 20 plus years, we were maintaining documents and paper files, right? We were looking things up manually and researching things manually. Now, I'm not so old that we didn't have email and things like that. We still had that. But there were a lot of things that were not digital at that point. Now, tech in general and AI in particular are just opening new doors for things that we can do. So my team's loving the journey with AI. Of course, any new entry or things that change our world can be a little unsettling, but we're really excited about the possibility that AI can take some of the administrative or routine repetitive work and turn that much faster so that we can free up some time from the team so that we can really focus on talking with our business stakeholders, talking with our employees, and using it to be much more strategic, more personal, focus on the human aspects and let the system do some of the behind the scenes administrative work for us. So time will tell where the journey lands. I think there's still an evolving space here, much more to do, but we're taking steps into that universe, trying to build some new tools and products, workflows with AI that we hope will do some interesting things for us. So super excited to see where this goes.
Thank you, Karen. Linda, Glynis, do you like to add anything here?
No, I mean, the only thing that I probably would add on there is with AI, it's making current policies, and this probably is going to be the next question around what we're seeing with how remote work and hybrid work arrangements are changing kind of what we would typically see in traditional mobility. But with AI, it's looking and pushing more of the envelope around the old legacy, very rigid, one-size-fits-all policies. That doesn't work very well anymore. And it's not to say that long-term traditional assignments aren't being continued to be utilized by companies, but with AI, there's this huge opportunity to look at all the data. And if you imagine just kind of sitting in a corporate role right now, the amount of hiring, the amount of talent that's sitting out there that may be untapped, the cost, all the finances, and if you look at all of that, it's just a lot of information. And AI right now, it's helping to enable those decisions. Where do you deploy the right talent at the right time? Is it necessary to move someone from the US to Europe, right? Versus within Europe in itself. So mobility leaders and businesses needs to start looking at AI as a tool towards decision making, and that's really what I think is driving the change in mobility.
And I'll just add on really quickly. I echo what everyone else has said, specifically about mobility moving towards more of a strategic versus operational. What Linda just said about the different types of assignment models, it's definitely forcing flexibility to be a non-negotiable, right? Employees are expecting options, and companies are being forced to rethink like policy structures that were probably built for a very different, more traditional workforce. Employee experience, I see that as a shift, but a shift back. So those of us dinosaurs that have been in mobility in the times when cost projections were manual, I remember doing those on Excel spreadsheets, right? We all know that if the assignment is going to fail when there are people who feel unsupported. So I think that companies are now going back to paying closer attention to the full life cycle, of expats, to make sure that retention and performance is protected. And then really quickly in AI, yes, it's improving policy modeling, cost forecasting, all of those things. It's accelerating, but I just want to remind everyone, it does not replace judgment. In this field of mobility, there is still a lot of nuance. There's culture, there's compliance, and there's human dynamics. And those three do not fit into any algorithm. There's no box for that.
Yeah, I would just add on that, I see the work that we do as one of the most inherently human jobs out there, especially in the corporate world, because what we do not only touches the employee's personal life, but also, their professional life, but also their personal life, as well as the life of their families, their pets, and everyone, the whole life experience. So I see in the audience, we've got a number of people who have made that journey themselves over the years, moving from country to country. And that's not something AI can do, is really respect and honor that human element in this work that we do. But I think AI gives us a tool to help with other parts of our work, so we can really make sure that human piece is supported and that our families can be successful in their moves and their journey and their next career venture. So really excited about the contribution we make there.
Thanks so much, Karen. And what a great segue, but reflection on sort of our next question. But all of you, before I go to that, have brought up the human element and how important employee experience has become, but also the fact that there's now more space to think about more strategic decisions. I think Linda mentioned going where is untapped talent, where are new source countries, and so thinking about the types of employees that make up your companies or those of your clients, because again, I know there's a distinction between in-house versus client services. What are some new talent markets or new global talent demographics that are exciting your team or your company? And it would be great to hear about it, because I think some of you already mentioned it from a few different angles. So for instance, how that talent is actually brought in, whether it's through outsourcing or BPO or hiring local talent at a subsidiary, or relocating people, the difficult one, internationally, and alongside whether there are particular skill sets or sectors that you see more in demand. And again, over to you, however you guys would like to participate.
Pick me.
Always, Sharon, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not excited about answering the question, but I noticed that there is a question from Olad, so please don't make me forget it, because there's a question around competence. So I'd like to dig into that. But in answer to your question, I think what we're seeing from the market is the primary demographic entering the workforce right now is Gen Z, right? And even if we don't want to talk about generations, we know there are X numbers in the workforce, but right now we're seeing that it's predominantly Gen Z. And I think they are influencing how organizations think about talent in a much more noticeable way. And I think it's probably because of how they have very different workforce expectations, and that's what's driving talent retention equally as talent acquisition. So it's really not just about who they are, but younger employees are already reporting lower levels of engagement, which shifts how we have to think about attracting them, retaining them, and how does mobility play a role in that. So you could arguably say that 10 years ago, an assignment model would work for a specific demographic. It may not work in the same way for this demographic. And it's not because mobility isn't an appealing opportunity, but but their workforce expectations may not be one that says, I need a mobility experience. So it's how do you find ways to ensure that you're managing the expectations while not eroding whatever your compensation and reward structure looks like, but just recognizing that the employee experience is different, right? So they have expectations around flexibility, development. And I think when we think about mobility models in the past, there are tenets of that we can probably revisit. So when we think about development in its truest sense, I think there's an opportunity here for us to consider that there is going to be a cohort that really wants development. So how can assignments be redesigned to ensure that the talent profiles are being matched, that design of development is intentional about their competency and their experience to manage succession planning? Then I think from a geography perspective, what we're certainly seeing is continued attention in high growth markets. So we think India, Southeast Asia, and maybe parts of Eastern Europe. And I think these regions really stand out, not only because of the depth of their digital and technical expertise, but also how they're positioned, weirdly enough, with evolving trade and economic partnerships. So I don't know if you're starting to see, politicians having very different trade conversations than we've had in the past. And it won't be too long before we start to see some of these interdependencies weave into where talent can have that freedom of mobility. And then that will really start to shift where that new talent market starts to look to shape up.
Yeah, I think sorry.
Go ahead. No?
Thank you. So I think I would add on just a little bit of that, just because you're already touching on the trade and what's happening geopolitically right now. So there is, at least in the oil and gas industry, because that's where I'm in, right? I'm in Houston for this. So the Middle East has been a critical talent hub for many of my clients. And with obviously the stuff that's happening right now in the Middle East, there's been this ongoing trend moving away from the traditional long-term assignments to more regional based. So you're starting to see a lot of commuters and rotators being put into those regions in and around the area around the regions, as opposed to bringing folks from outside of the region into the region. So that's a big focus right now for the oil and gas sector. And the other issue that I've been seeing and been hearing and talking a lot, quite a bit, is what's happening in Venezuela. So with the changes with OFAC, there's been several companies having conversations around and reassessing, does it make sense to move back into Venezuela? And if so, what does that talent pool look like? What are our risks? What are the things that we need to consider as a company to stay compliant on all of those? So I think a big part of the new talent demographic isn't really new or changing. It's something that's just being focused and spotlight right now on with what's happening globally.
Yeah, and I can jump in. Coming from my last two roles being in the tech sector, very different from the oil and gas industry. For my friends in Houston, again, we don't have manufacturing plants, right? So we don't have required locations where people need to be. So what we see with our employees is a very globally evolved mindset. People are now, which was rare back when I started in this business, but people are now eager for the chance to move and work from wherever they want to build their life and their career. And so we have lots of employees, and I've heard this from other industry friends as well, that are volunteering to or willing to move and don't even want or need or ask for company support. They just want the permission to be able to do their job from somewhere else. We evaluate those requests and we try to support them where it makes sense. But I think it's a struggle with some people that have this idea that, hey, I have my laptop. That's all I need to do my job. I can do it from anywhere I want. I can split my time in different countries, different parts of the year, visit, see family. Those are all great life experiences that we appreciate and value. But we also have to educate both our employees, our business leaders, and so forth on the compliance standpoints of that, right? So unfortunately, governments have not caught up with that theory of evolving their policies. So while technically the employee could do their job from almost anywhere, the There are risks that we have to take, both like cybersecurity risks that have to be factored in, as well as, time zone differences, for employees to be able to support their teams and their jobs, but also legal entity, tax, immigration risks as well. So it can be an interesting conversation when employees are like, I don't understand why we can't be more flexible with them. And it's not just because we like saying no. It is really that we're trying to find a balance in supporting them, but also protecting the company and making sure that we don't get either the company or the employee in situations that have negative consequences. So really interesting dynamic employment opportunities out there, but there are still a lot of limitations, and important for people to understand that as they're thinking about how to work, where to work, things of that sort.
And I think, Karen, you're spot on there. And it's an opportunity for us to really change the conversation within mobility on both sides of the table, right? So historically, and sadly still, mobility tends to be a downstream compliance impact conversation. So we come in after a decision's been made 9 times out of 10, where I think in an ideal world, these conversations around talent strategies, around workforce planning, where people want to move and can feasibly move to with less restriction, can happen at the workforce planning stage, so that when you're having these robust conversations with the employee who just wants to pick their laptop up and go, you can say, we can enable that, but here are some of the guardrails that you have to put in place. Because you're right, immigration laws are meant to keep us out. They're not meant to bring us in. And sometimes that is a very hard conversation for people to recognize. And I think also there's a fallacy because of how we work in silos with this big ecosystem that we have. We don't get pulled in until it's too late, or someone unfortunately believes immigration is the only deciding factor, when there are a myriad of other points, as you mentioned, cybersecurity, et cetera, that plays a role in putting the decision on the table. But they're certainly not barriers. They're just things that we need to consider. And then how do we have a path that works best for everyone to move forward? I think those are the conversations that I'd love to be a part of.
Awesome. And I mean, just hearing all of you speak right now, thinking about sort of my own personal journey, in my last role, I spent so much time trying to get that relocation and trying to like politic my way and figure out my way through the organization to figure out how to get to another country. And now I've moved to labor mobility partnerships, and I'm in a remote role, which everyone thinks is so exciting because I can move everywhere. But here, to your point, Karen, and to everyone's point here, there's still limitations, and there's ways of having to think about it in a structured way. So that nuance and that balance is such an interesting dynamic that I think we're all working through. But I really love what all of you have said about how global mobility is, and it's, especially from your role, is slowly becoming much more of a strategic conversation and a strategic role, rather than, and it should be a strategic role given all of these shifts that we need to plan for, rather than being retroactive. Maybe thinking about
Looks like we lost Prerna. So do you guys want to continue the conversation based on the next question?
Sure.
Or just continue the discussion. Sorry.
Yeah. Before that, there was something, and my brain's now catching up to my mouth. Linda, you had talked about technology at the top and about having some of these conversations. And I'm curious, in a way, when we think about the data, I think you had mentioned something about data. Mm-hmm. And, one of the biggest things in changing the conversation is, how do we harness the data to say, here's what the business needs to be in front of? Is there anything that comes to mind as to how that can be strategically positioned without it being a boil the ocean or, overloading a business? Like, what data points should we be looking at to tell that story when we're talking about this workforce change?
Oh my gosh, there's so many avenues that you can take on this, right? So if we look at just like the talent movement in themselves, you're looking at some of the last company that I worked for in-house, we had over 10,000 employees globally. And the expat population that I worked with was about 60 people. 60 people in a company of over 10,000 employees. It's really small, right? But when I look at what we had done in terms of the employees' profiles, the number of employees that listed, yes, I'm interested. Yes, I'm interested in going on assignment. It's not being tapped into, right? But it's how do you take that information now that's sitting out there in your talent pool, that's whether through your, Workday, SuccessFactor, whatever your HRMS system is, pulling that information out and saying, okay, let's look at this and then let's compare it against maybe your evaluation metrics, right? How do you develop that future talent and not just continue to send the same expats out? And there's nothing wrong with sending out the same expats, because there's a specific skill set, obviously, that they have that you're looking to send out and to train and to build upon in these other locations. But it's giving that up and coming generation, the middle management team and folks, that opportunity to lead and shine. Right. So, and you're not sending them out there kind of unprotected without any safety net. There's always going to be people within the organization that's going to be able to support them. But the reason why companies end up losing a lot of talent is because their employees' voices isn't being heard. They're being asked, being said, send me out. And they're not being sent out because the same folks are getting selected. Right. But then on the flip side of this, you've got Gen Z who's coming about. And I swear to God, 20 years ago, there was none of this. I'm just going to pick up my laptop and fly out to Australia and have you just live and work there for 6 months. Right. That just never existed. But that is existing now. And it's how does company take that information with your travel information. Right. So they may not be booking it through their Concur or your company travel programs. But how do you get that information pulled out when you're taking PTO or time off? Where exactly is it that you're going? And it should just be more of a curiosity type questions, but taking that information and then being able to create a dashboard of some sort to really identify, this is our demographic of employees that are picking up and leaving. This is the demographic of our employees that are asking for assignment that's been untapped, and we need to find some way to make this work. But it's looking at the things that we see every day, but can't make sense of because it is a lot of information. But creating a dashboard using, an Alteryx tool or a BI power dashboard of some sort to be able to create that visual, it helps tell a story. I'm a very much visual learner, hands-on kind of person. So you can sit here and tell me things and it's not going to sink in. But as soon as I start seeing numbers, as soon as I start seeing graphs and charts, it's going to start making a lot more sense.
I would like to jump in. I would really like to jump in behind that, Linda, because I don't know if you saw me grinning, but what you mentioned about the different generations reminded me of a project way many years ago when I was at Deloitte, and I was tasked with trying to move mobility beyond the traditional expat to include more women, right? And that's where they just said, we want to have more women, right, on assignment. I pulled in all this data from everywhere, and saw that not only, were there less women, but we had all of these other demographics, right? Minorities, generational differences of people who were not going on assignment. And so one of the first things that we did was actually put into the, when you do your annual reviews or your self-assessment, right? You can indicate, yes, I want to go on assignment, right? But then it doesn't stop there, because the people managers need to know how to address that. And then also the people who are raising their hands and saying they want to go on assignment need to know what an assignment really entails. It's not just, oh, I'm, going on a very long extended business trip, I'm going to have fun. What are the skills and, what qualifies you to go into on an assignment? Also for the people managers, hey, you're not just sending people on assignment that you want to get rid of because, like, hey, this person's not so much of a good employee, I'll just send them to Japan, or whatever like that. So anyway, it was a series of lunch and learns, I think, and I guess I'm passionate about this because I think that was actually over the whole 20 years, the best project and the most fun an informative project I ever worked on was inspiring people, around global mobility, being transparent around global mobility, having intranet sites, right? All of our companies have intranet sites. Creating a whole global mobility intranet site, right? This is how you can get onto assignment. These are the types of assignments that are available. What is the whole strategy about, mobility? So I'm gonna stop because I can literally talk about that all day. But I think that should give people some kind of understanding in that realm.
Well, I just want to jump in because I know we're talking a lot about assignments, which for those that are familiar with the business, I think, those are probably, we're referring mostly to those long-term international assignments. They're very traditional. And again, when I started in the business, were the bulk of the work that we did. But I would say, that may still be true in certain industries, but more and more industries, in tech in particular, what we've seen is a trend for what we call permanent, I like to call indefinite one-way transfers. So the employee's actually changing their employment home. They're not getting they're getting help moving, but they're not getting the big package with ongoing allowances, housing, schooling support, and things of that sort. So we're basically helping them get there, getting them integrated into the new location, the new entity, and then they go on their, they're really on their own to manage life after that. So that's been a big change, I think, in parts of the industry where we see more and more of those. And maybe internal, they may be external new hires that we need to fill, hiring talent to move to a location where we need it. But that's a very different type of experience for people as opposed to those long-term international assignments. And then talking about back to the data point, tying back to that, I think, as a program leader internally, one of the most important skills that we can have is data storytelling. So making sure we have the right data, that we can put it into those pieces that are easy to digest, but also adding in with the data some anecdotal human stories, human examples to really bring home the importance of the work that we do, the points that we're trying to make, and combining those two elements to really help the businesses. So one thing that we've been doing is working on semi-annual reports for each of our business organizations, each of our divisions within the company. And we really go through the visuals, the data, like the maps and the numbers, but we also add in those additional components and what we like to call actionable insights. So trends, patterns, things that they may want to think about. What does this mean for their business, for the next 6 months, for the next year, 2 years. So, but you've got to get that kind of information in front of business leaders to make impact, because, if they just hear about the one story, that may be good or bad, and that may, bias their opinions of what's happening. But they also, if they, just get raw data without context, that doesn't necessarily help them either. So combining that, I think, is one of the most critical skill sets for people in our roles.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone. It's so great to hear everyone talking so passionately about data. I'm so sorry, by the way, to drop off. Despite all of those advancements in technology that we've been talking about for the last hour, internet still seems to be a challenge in Kenya. But maybe we'll go to a vision board question now. So looking ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, the next decade, what will effective global mobility leadership look like? There's going to be a series of questions just to get you guys thinking, but what skills will leaders such as yourselves need to succeed? And how can someone who wants to enter the industry get into the space? And maybe to take it a next step in terms of vision boarding, what could potentially look very normal in a decade that now seems like a far stretch? So feel free to respond however you like to whatever you like.
I'll jump in on a piece of that first, which is, if you're interested in this as a career, how do you get involved? I think you heard from all of our intros, all of us, I believe, started in a supplier space. So either one of the big 4 tax firms, there's immigration, legal immigration law firms, as well as relocation management companies, destination services providers, things of that sort. So if you're interested and you don't have experience, those are great places to get your foot in the door and learn the business, because you get to see a lot of different clients, how they structure their programs, their challenges and needs. So it's a great learning space to start building your network, what I like to call your mental toolbox of things that can help you. Of course, you can go into corporate roles; they may be more limited, but I think leading a corporate program, those skills that I learned in my early days working in the supplier field with so many colleagues, so many clients, and so many programs to learn from, really helped shape my ability to run a program for one company. So I definitely suggest looking there first, and then I'll turn over the rest for the other pieces.
Right. I definitely want to jump in on this. So to answer the questions, effective mobility leaders will definitely need to be business strategists, right? They need to understand not only talent, but risks and global markets, like, all in one view. They would have to be able to connect mobility decisions directly to business outcomes, right? Not just operations or execution. I know we talked about, that earlier, right? The strategy versus the operations. And that requires, very strong judgment, cultural intelligence, of course, and the ability to influence, right, at executive levels. For someone new, I would say to start with curiosity, right? Of course, learning the fundamentals like immigration, tax, and policy, but just don't stop there. That business acumen, again, is going to be crucial, right? And understanding in how these organizations work and how they scale and how the talent fits into that equation. I think a lot of people think of mobility as, just another part of HR, but it actually sits at the center of like how companies grow and how they enter markets and how they develop global leaders. I'm happy to say that because I live in Dallas and I'm close to the University of Texas at Dallas, they actually have, I believe, the only global mobility club that is supported by our global mobility leaders and relocation leaders here in the local area. They are a club of students who are involved in all aspects of management and international business, and they learn all these mobility. They do mobility case studies. I mean, it's like totally awesome. They intern, and I think if something like that could be replicated across other universities, that would be a great starting point. Because just like Karen said, most of us started in the supplier space. There is no one that I know of who, just became a global mobility corporate person. But these young leaders do have that mentorship and that opportunity. So if you don't have that at your school, I think speaking with people, I have students who actually ping me on LinkedIn and say, I want to learn about global mobility. And I will chat with them because I love talking about global mobility. And they're like, I never knew, things like this existed. I wish I had someone, to teach me those things. And then I think you mentioned something about in 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to look back and wonder why mobility was ever so reactive as opposed to proactive or intentional with the I don't know. I'm praying for that, right? I'm hoping that that's what it's going to come to in the next 5 to 10 years. But definitely, I think that we're going to expect more seamless global involvement, fewer barriers, and more standardized approaches across regions. And I'll stop there and let someone else jump in.
Oh, I echo both your comments, and I think the only thing I'd add on to that is around the systems thinking and how all those pieces connect, right? So we operate in silos and we've historically made that work. I think someone coming in the next level set of skills is to elevate that. It's how do you come to the table understanding where those intersections occur and how do you help the business plan for it without overwhelming or making them feel as though they're barriers. So a simple issue with an immigration scenario, as one example, may have an impact on payroll and tax. But if you only come to the conversation with a singular lens, you lose sight of being credible to the business because you want to have that systems level thinking. Every single action has a consequence and makes an impact on something else. So how do you bring that kind of systems thinking to the conversation, I think, is going to be critical for the next iteration of mobility talent. And I think you touched on it, Linda, earlier. It's about this data literacy, right? So it's not just reporting the data, but how do you interpret it and how do you use that to guide decisions, I think will be very, very critical. And as we've touched on, I think you're going to also see individuals who have a comfort with AI and digital tools. So not necessarily just building them, but certainly knowing how to use them effectively and critically. And I think you, Glynis, had said at the top, you can't override judgment. So it's the ability to understand, if you're prompting, what are you prompting for? What are you trying to establish as your end goal? And then even if that information spits out to you the holy grail, question that, because not everything that you see in front of you is always accurate. So it's the ability to really parse that information critically and understand your business and the impact of that decision and have that conversation. And underneath that curiosity too, it's, if I can put it with my own experience, is be very diligent in having a voice at the table. Anybody can sit at a table, but be diligent in having your voice at the table. When you're there, ensure that you look around. And if I bring inclusivity into this conversation for a second, think about the parallels and the silos that we work in. Who's not in the room? Who's not at the table? Who's not speaking? That is probably someone who is critical to being part of the conversation. Your role, unfortunately, will always have to be having that oversight and lens to say, who's not here, what's not being considered, and how do we ensure that those elements are being brought in? That's how, Nan, I think you get rid of the silos and you bring that conversation in to say that we're wanting to have a changed conversation. Let's start thinking about these things. You know, I remember bringing in employee experience and the people analytics team on something really innocuous that started off for immigration, but it landed into developing how do we understand the experience for the employee, knowing the constraints that we have. So I think someone who has the capacity as well as the desire to do all of those things, sometimes well, sometimes not well at all, sometimes failing miserably, but you're diligent in saying that this is something that I want to do because I know that the end goal really impacts what we're trying to do here as an organization. I think you'll do well in this industry.
So the only thing I would add to all of this, because I love everyone's responses on this, is as a mobility leader, you've got to be your own CEO. You've got to understand what is happening on the talent management side, talent acquisition side. You've got to understand the financials of the impact of what you're suggesting, what it is that you're building, understand the risk and compliance, the payroll, the employment tax, the legal corporate tax obligations, right? And then the biggest, I think, most CEOs look at is your branding on this. So it's how do you make sure that you as a representative of mobility is bringing your best foot forward in a strategic manner with the rest of the executive leadership team. So you've got to act as your own CEO. You've got to advocate for yourself. And to Cheryl's point, notice who's not in the room, because the number of times that we have conversations with leaders, and especially in the mobility space, 9 out of 10 times we're left out of the room, but no one speaks up for us. So we have to make sure that we're looking at who's not in the room and being able to identify, all right, well, what are the areas of risk? What are the things that we need to think about? And if with everything, with everyone's comments and on this, is the best way to summarize this is you've got to be your own CEO.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I just want to call out the comment from Orla in the chat that, you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier. As you guys can see, there's a lot of complexities, a lot of pieces, a lot of stakeholders that we try to manage in these roles. But at the end of the day, we have to always remember the people, the family that's at the center of each and every move. This is again, intensely stressful human experience, potentially stressful, also exciting in some cases, but we have to keep them at the core of what we do and remember there are a why, the why we do this work. So we have to make sure that we're always keeping them at the center of everything.
I agree with that 100%. 100%.
Thanks, everyone. That was such a great wrap. I really appreciate all of you bringing in such thoughtful insights. And I especially appreciated all of your reflections on how we want to move to a place where this becomes the norm in terms of it being a forward-looking strategic exercise that's really about piecing together the ecosystem and considering not just one team, not just one factor, but the entire system. And I love the analogy of being your own CEO within a particular team and rules. So thanks, everyone. I would encourage all the panelists now just to drop in the chat on how folks can best connect with you or support you. So they can learn how best to reach out to you and see if there's ways they can collaborate. And with that, I'll invite Nyna now to take us through or help us through Q&A.
Hi, thank you all so much. That was a fantastic discussion. I was a little distracted because I was trying to bring people up, their comments up on stage, but I can always watch the replay. So I do see questions in the chat. So I'm going to pull up the question, and then the panelists can decide. The panelists can read out the question and then respond to it. I'm also going to run a poll while this is happening. While the panelists are answering the questions, we'll also run a poll. I've never run a poll before. And Prerna, I also wanted to thank you. You did a brilliant job of moderating the panel. So thank you for doing that. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask here, but the flow was beautiful. And thank you, Olag, for joining us in the chat. We're sorry you couldn't join us on stage, but we appreciate your insights in the chat. So I'm just going to run this poll. And while I do it, let me pull up the questions. People are also telling you guys how much they've enjoyed that. So, okay, I'll have to go backwards with the questions. Okay. So whoever wants to go read the question out and then respond to it, and then I'll pull up the next one.
Well, I'll jump in since my name's mentioned, but I think there's a million ways you can slice and dice data, right? So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to either solve, research, or share with the business partners. I can speak for related to the specific information that we give to our businesses on a semi-annual basis. We do relocation, but again, we may distinguish in certain patterns, like which policies, where they moves within the same country, moves internationally, et cetera. But we don't necessarily look at, this immigration and new hires. If we move someone, they're relocations, they're included. And then we have separate stats for immigration cases. So some of those may be immigration cases related to individuals that we moved that also needed immigration, but they could also be people that we've hired locally that were on some kind of status. So we tend to kind of look at the scope of work and not, at that level. But again, it would depend on what we needed for the moment.
Thank you, Karen. So whoever wants to answer the next question, go ahead. And I just want to thank all the audience as well. What an engaged audience, sharing all your insights and comments. So yeah, so maybe somebody else wants to take this question from Dominique.
I think the answer there is that the family support is not an afterthought. It is something that is core to making sure that the employees that we're sending are going to be able to go with peace of mind, because they're not going to go if they know that their family is not taken care of. Okay, hold on. Linda, do you use AI to screen who gets to be expatriated or not? No, we do not. Not me personally, but at my previous company, and it's something that I've been thinking about quite actively with a lot of the directors here at Anderson. It's how do we identify where there are talent that's been asking to go either on assignment or just to move to another location that's not visible or not necessarily visible to the business leaders on this. So I think it is important for sure to be able to leverage AI to identify these little niches and hidden data. But otherwise, if it's just raw data that's just being fed to me, I'm not going to be able to take a look at that, not as a consultant, and not even if I were on the corporate side still. It's something that still needs some fine tuning, and it needs to be, data needs to be used for a purpose, right? Because if you just have data and you don't really have an end use for it, garbage in, garbage out. So you have to know what it is that you're looking for and how to create that story to support whatever decision the business is looking for, or that you're trying to create if you're trying to create a business case for yourself to go on assignment.
Thank you so much, Linda, for answering. And I know we have more questions, but before we do that, I'm willing to keep this on for a little while more. If any of the panelists want to stay and the guests want to stay in the audience, I do want to recognize, you made the time an hour to do this, but I do want to bring on the sponsor and supporter of this event, Jane Liu. She was actually my boss when I worked for this amazing organization called Upwardly Global. She's a rock star, and she got this whole global mobility panel going. So Jane's going to share briefly about her work, and I'm also going to share her slides, but keep the questions and the comments going. All right. Let me just bring your slides.
Great. Hi, everyone. This has been so fascinating. I am just blown away by how much I've learned from this panel. So I'm Jane Liu. I'm with the Livelihood Impact Fund. We're a private investing fund out of New York, and I lead a portfolio on global mobility and cross-border employment largely. And what we're focused on, we're sort of like all of you, focus on the future of global mobility, trying to understand how we take the sort of friction and discount of how labor and talent moves around the world. And I asked Nyna to put together this panel because I just wanted to learn about your industry and learn. I did today, and I discovered what I thought might be true, which is this is an industry of problem solvers and pragmatic visionaries. And I love the vision that you all would be the ones at the table setting the business strategy in the future, because I do believe we're moving towards a world that is so interconnected, and that business will only grow if we can leverage all that interconnectedness and optimize talent. So thank you for sharing everything you did today. I did want to put out an offer, which is we're an innovation fund. We take a lot of risk. We can support any kind of entity. And so if there's something that you're working on that you think would improve global mobility at a systems level, or if you're scaling something and you need a little bit of support to scale it, we're interested to hear from you. So it could be a pilot, it could be some concept, it could be something inside your company, outside your company. We're just definitely interested in being a partner in the future of global mobility and where this space is going and where the world is sort of letting talent flow where it needs to be, regardless of national origin and all of that. So thank you for sharing your time today. I put my assistant's information there. I don't know if you can see it very well, though.
We can't. Jane, maybe you could share. Could you put it in the comment on LinkedIn after the event?
Yeah, I'll put it in LinkedIn. That would be great. And I invite you to reach out to us. We'd love to hear, even if it's just kind of an idea in germination that you haven't gone too far on. We are supporting some quite idea stage things. So thank you, everyone, and to Nyna and Prerna and this amazing panel. I learned so much from you today.
Thank you so much, Jane. So we have 1 minute left. Jane, if you can just post in the comment the email address on how people who are interested in this can reach out to you. I know there are more questions. What I thought, because I do want to end at 10, the panelists, if any of you are available, if you can go through the questions on the link. I think most of the questions are on the LinkedIn, and even Prerna, after this event is done, because I'm sure there's also a lot of people you might want to connect with. They might want to connect with you. I mean, this has been an amazing interactive session. I'm sorry if I kept pulling comments up on stage while you were speaking, but I just felt I had to bring people, there are people who are sharing insights and, leaving such nice feedback. So so if you can go to the comments after this is done and respond to whoever has asked questions, that would be great. And I am running the Expat Woman Virtual Summit next month. In fact, Linus is one of my speakers at that summit because I am the founder of the Expat Woman. I'd love for you to join. It's a free virtual summit We have women joining us from all over the world, globally mobile international women. I'm just looking for if I can share the when you want something, you can never find it. So I'll share the link in the comments later. But yeah, I want to end at 10. So thank you all. Thank you to my panelists, to Prerna. Thank you to Jane for making this happen, for encouraging me to do this amazing event. It's been such a fantastic experience. And thank you to all the guests. And cheers to global mobility in the industry, AI innovation, and the future. Namaste. Bye,
Thank you so much,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Right.
And just a quick add that we'll add Jane's contact, her EA's contact. We couldn't do it on the chat, Nyna.
Oh,
so
really?
We'll do it on the event. Yeah, there's a restriction, I think, for some of us.
No.
Should we send
Jane,
it to you?
No, Jane should do it in the comments. Jane, you have to do it in the comments, not the chat. See don't click on comments instead of chat. You see?
It still says you have to connect to your YouTube account, I think.
Oh, really? Okay, so we'll do. Yeah. I'll send you the links to share it after the thing, Jane, or to your PA. All right. People are still leaving such nice. I'm going really quickly. All right. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a
so inspiring. Take care. Bye-bye.